Yes, I'm Ralph K Manley from Springfield, Missouri, and I was with the 501st Parachute Infantry, 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne and War II.
And Mr.
And I'm James Maggellas. My origin originally was in the state of Wisconsin, presently live in Texas. My friends and colleagues call me Maggie. I joined the paratroopers early on in '43, and then was shipped out to Africa, where I joined the 82nd and fought all through Italy. Was wounded twice at the Battle of the Bulge. Fought through Italy, jumped in Holland at Market Garden, and fought through Germany, through the Battle of the Bulge, and in the occupation of Germany. And so I was 2.5 years overseas, all the while with the 82nd Airborne Division, and all the while with the same rifle company, first as the platoon leader and then as the company commander.
Yes, actually I was in Paris on a 24-hour pass after we just returned from Holland. And a loudspeaker came on and says, all units report to your units immediately, as quickly as possible, any way possible. So we returned then from Paris back to our unit and immediately got on what clothes we had, and I still had on my Class A for, of course, being in Paris. And we loaded onto port battalion trucks, these semi-trucks that had 4-foot sidewalls on them and open tops, whatever, and loaded onto those without overcoats or without overshoes, and headed towards the Bulge. And it was very cold.
My story is quite unusual in that when we were relieved in Holland to return back to Paris and refit and regroup, receive replacements, and await our next assignment, instead of going back to Paris with my regiment, I was sent over to Leicester, England, which was our rear headquarters, where we had left when we went into Holland. And I'd gone back to Leicester because there were several hundred replacements waiting there for reassignment. Yeah. That Fort Benning couldn't turn out enough paratroopers to meet our requirements.
That's true.
So they started a parachute school in England. It lasted only 2 weeks, only needed 3 jumps, and you were a paratrooper. And so these young men had gone through parachute school somewhere in England and were waiting reassignment. And they sent me over from the 504 to be with these guys, spend a couple of weeks with them, bring them up to speed, tell them what their baptism of fire would look like, and then bring them across the channel and join the division. That was my mission. We left England and started back on our trip, crossed the channel and got on 40 and 8s in Paris, and I arrived in Soissons, France, in dusk. It was about dusk on the 17th of December. The Germans had broken through earlier, but no one really knew what the situation was. It was so fluid. They didn't know how far they had advanced. They didn't know what was happening. The information was sparse, but it was that kind of a situation. And when I arrived there, we were met with trucks from the 82nd Airborne Division, and then we loaded on to go into the division area, into the regimental area. And I sat up front with one of my old buddies that I knew from back in the States, and he said to me, Maggie, he says, we're pulling out in the morning. Now imagine, I just come from London. We just were through in Holland. And here's my buddy saying we're pulling out in the morning. I couldn't believe it. We had no indication there was anything really was going on. It really hadn't hit the news yet. And when I got back to the company area, it was all lit up. The orderly room was lit up. Guys were packing their things and putting them away, which was always the case when we went on a mission. Our personal things were packed and then put in storage somewhere. And when the campaign was over, you come back and you got it. If you were lucky, it was still there.
Yeah.
Somebody hadn't taken it on you. And they were doing all that. And more than that, the lights were on over the whole area. And we had light discipline, noise and light discipline in the combat zone. France was still in the combat area. But there was all this was going on. Men were packing and getting ready and so on. In the meantime, what had happened was the 82nd Airborne Division, or the 18th Airborne Commander, General Ridgway, had gone to the States for Christmas or on leave.
Yeah.
In the 101st, General Taylor was back in the States.
Yeah.
Everybody was preparing for the holidays.
Yeah.
The orderly rooms were lit up. There were Christmas trees. A lot of our men were gone. And that night, there was a call from 18th Airborne Corps down to General Gavin, who was dressing for dinner. And his aide said that someone from 18th Airborne Corps called, all excited. And he said, he tried to explain what was happening, but he really didn't know. But he was excited, and he said, and General Ridgway is gone, and General Gavin, you're the Corps commander, acting Corps commander. And alert the 82nd and the 101st. So they did. That was the night of the 17th. They had broken through the morning before. He alerted us, alerted the 101st. We piled on not the deuce and a halves, but we piled on what I called cattle trucks. Yeah. Reminded me of what we put cattle in. There weren't any seats, there weren't anything. There was no cover on it at all. And
Yeah.
trucks pulled up, and we loaded onto these trucks with the equipment that we had. But more than that, and I'll never forget, is with the clothes on our back. Now, jump clothes were cotton. They weren't wool clothes. They weren't winter clothes.
Right.
They were regular clothes and leather boots in snow that, as in many places, was 2 feet deep. We were not prepared for winter fighting.
That's right.
The Germans were. The Germans had planned this. They planned all aspects of it. Their men came, and they were in heavy uniforms and white on the outside, camouflage, so they'd blend in
Yeah,
with the trees
Yeah.
and the background and so on, and all of that. And we started out in trucks, headed for Belgium. Where and why and where the Germans were, we did not know.
Right.
And short of all of our men, we didn't have all of our crew serve weapons because, as was always the case, Mark, when we came back from the front and we were refitting and preparing for our next mission, the ordnance would pick up our crew serve weapons, our mortars and our machine guns, and service them so it'd be ready to go. We didn't have all of our crew serve weapons. We didn't have all of our men. They said, never mind. You got to get going right now.
Yeah.
And they'll catch up with you later.
That's right.
They rounded him up. He was in Paris. And I had just come back, and I had these guys. We loaded on the trucks, and then we headed for Belgium.
Yeah. Where we met troops that was coming out, wounded, this, that, and the other, walking as we crossed paths, going in and them coming out. Those who were disenchanted by having been overrun by the Germans and so on, and a truck with maybe a series of bodies on it. And as one rounded the corner, some of the pieces of bodies fell off the truck. And at that time, they had grouped together clerks, anybody that was a soldier, to go to the front. And some of those, not having seen that, just keeled over in their tracks, so on, because they had not seen that type of wartime before. We did not know actually what was going on. We did know, as we had been on pass in Paris, every person returned to your unit immediately as quickest way possible. And so as we got back to our unit at Mormelon, France, then we got our equipment and our guns and whatever, and we're on trucks in minutes and headed off to Bastogne. We didn't know the situation. We just know it was cold, and we had to go as we were without overshoes or overcoats. And again, with 0 degrees, you can imagine that in open air trucks going there, put in like cattle, you might say, on trucks that weren't covered. They were actually port battalion trucks that were used to hauling merchandise from the ships out to the warehousing areas. And so that's what we rode to Bastogne on. And once we got there, of course, it was just dismount and head up the road to the city on foot, and messed others as we're coming out, both wounded and disabled and what have you, who were hobbling and going out, and trucks coming out hauling bodies that had been killed and so on. That's what we met as we were going into Bastogne.
Well, we loaded on these trucks, as I called cattle trucks, because they were stake trucks. We loaded on them with the men that we had and what gear we had, and we started towards Belgium. Now, we had no hard facts, no hard intelligence
Right.
as to what was happening. And in the military, as you know, in the absence of cold facts, rumors take over.
Yeah.
So it was all kinds of rumors as to what was going on and what was happening.
Yeah.
We did know one thing, that the Germans were on the rampage, had broken through our lines. We weren't sure how far they'd gone, how many units, or anything else. So we sat in these trucks when we left Soissons, France, heading for Belgium, for parts unknown, to make contact. Our mission was find the lead elements of the German panzer units and stop them,
Yeah.
and turn them back.
Yeah.
That was our mission.
Yep.
That's all they could tell us. So in the absence of facts, we would sit in this truck and we'd be talking about it. I sat with my company commander, Captain Karl Kappel, and we sat down. We had no seats in these trucks. And we discussed everything. But one thing I remember leaving in the morning, and I looked up and it was a fairly clear sky. That is, it was suitable for aircraft, including the Luftwaffe could have flown. And we kept speculating that we would be a beautiful target for the Luftwaffe moving along in these state trucks full of guys without any anti-aircraft cover, without any kind of support, without any kind of air support, heading for Belgium.
Yeah.
Now, it'd been early on in the war, the Luftwaffe would have picked on us, to be sure. We thought that maybe they would again, that whatever they had left of them, they would put into action, because there was a major effort on their part.
Yeah.
And so we pushed through. And I remember coming into Belgium, and in every little town that we went through, there was a sign, just kind of a little square sign, maybe a foot by 3. And I always remember the one that said Baston. I never heard of it before. And as we went in past this sign, people were coming out the street and waving at us. They were waving at us. We were, after all, their liberators at that point. And I never forgot that. I didn't realize at the time that that would be a major battleground. We pushed through there and headed up towards Liège. Our initial objective was to stop at Bastogne, but since we had gotten left earlier and were on the road first, they decided to move the 82nd line up into the northern sector, where the Germans were threatening to Liège and then go on into Antwerp.
Yeah.
And so we did, and we kept pushing forward, and then for the first time we began to hear the sounds of artillery. We knew we were approaching the combat area when you could hear in the distance artillery. Up until that point, we haven't seen any evidence of the enemy, any sounds, anything. But as we were approaching this area of Werbemont, we began to hear it. So decided we would pull over and dismount at Werbemont. And from there on, we would move on foot because we were getting, like we would say, we were getting warm.
Right.
The enemy was somewhere coming, and our mission was to find him and stop him. And we dismounted then at Werbemont.
Actually, I was out, being a demolitionist, I was out on the edge in a foxhole, and in this case, the ground was frozen, but coming out of a barn lot with all the feces and cattle stuff that was coming out, it was easier to dig a foxhole there, so you can imagine what I must have smelled like. And that part with a bazooka, so on. And with the bazooka, to shoot at tanks that were coming in, and certainly that's what we did, and disabled some tanks that were coming on through with the bazooka, but they got very close, so on. And it was one of, oftentimes maybe with 2 in a hole, but in this case it was just 1 because the ground was so hard to dig, at least on the surface and with the snow, and you didn't want to reveal your position because of the black dirt on top of the white snow, so you had to get snow and cover over the soil that you dug out of